Staff Sergeant Rachel Martinez adjusted her grip on the McMillan TAC-50 rifle, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon that had become an extension of herself over the past 8 years. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton shooting range, where the elite sniper unit was conducting their monthly qualification tests. "Think you can handle that big gun, Martinez?" called out Sergeant First Class Tony Bishop from behind her. His voice carried that familiar tone of mockery she'd grown accustomed to. "Maybe you should stick to something more your size." Rachel didn't turn around. She'd learned long ago that responding to Bishop's comments only encouraged him. Instead, she focused on her breathing, her heartbeat, the wind patterns dancing across the distant targets. At 32, she was one of only 3 women in the entire sniper division at Fort Braxton, and certainly the only one who consistently outshot most of her male counterparts. "I heard they're thinking of sending Martinez on the next deployment," whispered Corporal Jake Williams to Bishop, though he made sure his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wonder if she frees up when it matters." "She won't get the chance," Bishop replied with a harsh laugh. "Colonel Henderson's not stupid enough to put our lives in the hands of someone who belongs in the kitchen, not the field." Rachel's jaw tightened, but her hands remained steady. She'd heard variations of these comments for years. When she first arrived at Fort Braxton, fresh from sniper school where she'd graduated second in her class, the men had assumed she was there to fill some kind of quota. They'd expected her to wash out within months. That was 5 years ago. She lined up her shot at the 1,000-meter target, a paper silhouette that seemed impossibly small through her scope. The wind was tricky today, gusting from the southeast at about 8 miles per hour. She made the necessary adjustments, feeling the familiar calm that came over her whenever she was behind the rifle. The shot rang out across the range, echoing off the nearby hills. Through her scope, she watched the bullet find its mark dead center, just as she'd intended. "Lucky shot," muttered Bishop, but there was less conviction in his voice now. Rachel moved to the 1,500-meter line without comment. This was where most of the unit struggled. The bullet drop at this distance required precise calculations, and the slightest miscalculation would send the round wide of the target. She took her time, feeling the wind, reading the heat mirage dancing above the ground. Her father had taught her to hunt in the mountains of Colorado when she was just 12 years old. "Patience, Mia," he'd always said. "The mountain will teach you everything you need to know if you just listen." The second shot was as perfect as the first dot. By the time she moved to the 2,000-meter line, a small crowd had gathered. Even some of the officers had wandered over to watch. At this distance, most snipers were happy to hit the target at all. Precision was nearly impossible. Rachel settled into her prone position, feeling the familiar comfort of the rifle against her shoulder. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting all the sounds of the range fade away. In the silence, she could feel everything: the earth beneath her, the wind on her face, the steady rhythm of her own heart. When she opened her eyes, the world had narrowed to just her, the rifle, and the distant target. The shot broke cleanly, and she watched through the scope as the bullet traced its arc across the morning sky. 2 seconds later, it punched through the center of the target. The range fell silent. "Well, I'll be damned," someone whispered. Colonel James Henderson, the unit commander, had been watching from the observation tower. He climbed down and walked over to where Rachel was packing up her equipment. "Fine shooting, Martinez," he said, though his tone was more grudging than congratulatory. "But the range isn't the battlefield. Paper targets don't shoot back." "No, sir, they don't," Rachel replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "But they also don't move, don't take cover, and don't require split-second decisions under stress. I'm ready for whatever comes next." Henderson studied her for a long moment. He was old-school military, a man who'd come up through the ranks when women weren't allowed in combat roles. The integration of female soldiers into specialized units like snipers was still new to him, and Rachel could see the doubt in his eyes. "We'll see about that, Sergeant," he said finally, then turned and walked away. As Rachel finished cleaning her rifle, she overheard Bishop talking to Williams near the equipment shed. "Doesn't matter how good she is on the range," Bishop was saying. "When bullets start flying and people start dying, she'll crack. Women always do. Mark my words, if she ever sees real action, she'll get someone killed." Rachel felt a familiar fire burning in her chest. She'd proven herself time and again, but it was never enough. Every achievement was dismissed as luck, every success questioned. She thought about her younger brother, Miguel, who'd been killed by an IED in Afghanistan 3 years ago. He'd joined the army because of her, inspired by her dedication to service. His death had nearly broken her, but it had also hardened her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't strong enough, brave enough, or good enough to serve her country at the highest level. That evening, Rachel sat in her small apartment, off base, cleaning her personal rifle, a gift from her father when she'd graduated from sniper school. The news was on in the background, reporting on the ongoing tensions in Eastern Europe. Intelligence suggested that Russian-backed separatists were planning major offensive operations, and NATO forces were being positioned to respond. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Saw the news, Mia. Stay safe, your father would be so proud. Rachel smiled sadly. Her father had died of cancer 2 years ago, never quite understanding why his daughter had chosen such a dangerous profession. But he'd supported her anyway, just as he'd supported everything she'd ever done. Next morning, Colonel Henderson called an emergency briefing. The entire sniper unit gathered in the briefing room, where maps of Eastern Europe covered the walls and intelligence reports were spread across every table. Gentlemen, Henderson began, then caught himself. And lady, we've received deployment orders. Intelligence indicates a major offensive is imminent. And NATO command has requested our most experienced snipers for forward reconnaissance and target elimination. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. This was what she'd been training for, preparing for, dreaming of for years. I'll be selecting 6 snipers for this mission, Henderson continued. It's going to be dangerous, high-priority work in hostile territory. I need soldiers I can count on absolutely. He began reading names from his list. Bishop was first, of course, then Williams, then 4 other male snipers, all with years of combat experience. Rachel waited for her name, but it never came. That's the team, Henderson announced. We deploy in 72 hours. Dismissed. As the room emptied, Rachel remained in her seat, staring at the maps on the wall. Bishop paused by her chair on his way out. Sorry, Martinez, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Maybe next time they'll need someone to cook for the forward operating base. After he left, Rachel found herself alone with Colonel Henderson. Sir, she said, standing at attention. Permission to speak freely. Henderson looked up from his papers, already knowing what was coming. Go ahead, Sergeant. Sir, with respect, my qualifications exceed those of at least 3 of the men you selected for this mission. My range scores are consistently higher. My tactical knowledge is excellent, and I've been training for exactly this type of operation for 5 years. Henderson set down his pen and looked at her with tired eyes. Martinez, you're a fine soldier, but this isn't about range scores or training exercises. This is about life and death in the real world. The men on this team have combat experience. They've been tested under fire. So give me the chance to be tested, sir. I can't take that risk, Henderson said firmly. Not with American lives on the line. I'm sorry, but that's final. Rachel felt something break inside her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Yes, sir. Will that be all? That's all, Sergeant. She walked out of the briefing room with her head held high, but inside she was crumbling. Everything she'd worked for, sacrificed for, seemed to be slipping away. No matter how good she was, how hard she trained, how much she proved herself, it would never be enough. That night, she called her mother. They passed me over again. Mama, she said, fighting back tears. No matter what I do, it's never enough. Mia, her mother said gently, your father used to say that sometimes the mountain tests us not to break us, but to show us how strong we really are. Your time will come. Rachel wanted to believe her, but as she hung up the phone and looked at her reflection in the dark window, she wondered if her time would ever come at all. 3 weeks after the deployment she'd been excluded from, Rachel was going through the motions of routine training when Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thompson, the base's intelligence officer, approached her during morning PT. Martinez, Thompson called out as Rachel finished her 5-mile run. I need to speak with you. Privately. Rachel followed Thompson to a secure briefing room she'd never been inside before. The walls were lined with classified intelligence reports and satellite imagery. Thompson closed the door and activated a white noise generator. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, Thompson began. 3 days ago, we lost contact with Colonel Henderson's team. Rachel felt her stomach drop. Despite everything, these were still her fellow soldiers, men she'd trained with for years. Lost contact how, ma'am? Their last transmission came from a forward observation post overlooking the Krakow Valley. Intelligence suggests they may have been compromised or captured. Thompson pulled up a satellite image on her laptop. Here's where it gets complicated. We've identified a high-value target moving through the area, convoy carrying General Viktor Petrov, the architect of the current offensive operations. Rachel studied the image. The terrain was mountainous, with Long sight lines across the valley, perfect sniper country. Ma'am, why are you telling me this? Thompson met her eyes directly, because every other qualified sniper on this base is either deployed elsewhere or part of Henderson's missing team. And because this target represents the best chance we've had in months to disrupt enemy operations and potentially locate our missing soldiers. The implications hit Rachel like a thunderbolt. You want to send our best available sniper, Thompson corrected. Which, according to every training record I've reviewed, happens to be you. Rachel felt a mixture of excitement and terror. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, but it was coming at the worst possible time and under the worst possible circumstances. What does Colonel Henderson think about this? Thompson's expression darkened. Colonel Henderson is currently missing in action. This operation falls under my authority as intelligence officer. The question is, are you ready? Rachel thought about her brother Miguel, about her father's lessons in the Colorado mountains, about every slight and dismissal she'd endured over the years. Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. Over the next 18 hours, Rachel received the most intensive briefing of her military career. The target zone was in hostile territory, a 3-day hike through mountain terrain to reach the optimal firing position. Intelligence suggested the convoy would pass through the valley in exactly 4 days, giving her minimal time to get into position. The shot will be at extreme range, Thompson explained, pointing to the topographical maps. Our calculations put the distance at just under 4 kilometers, 3,847 meters to be exact. It's at the very edge of what's possible with the McMillan TAC-50. Rachel had never attempted a shot at that distance, even in training. The longest confirmed kill in military history was just over 3,500 meters, made by a Canadian sniper in Afghanistan. What Thompson was asking for was beyond the limits of conventional sniper doctrine, ma'am. At that range, there are so many variables: wind, air pressure, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth becomes a factor. I know, Thompson said quietly. But our intelligence says Petrov will only be vulnerable for about 30 seconds as his convoy passes through the valley. It's a one-shot opportunity, literally. That evening, Rachel spent hours on the range, pushing her equipment and skills to their absolute limits. She practiced calculating bullet drop and wind drift at extreme distances, memorizing the ballistic tables until she could recite them in her sleep. Sergeant Major Patricia Hayes, the base's senior non-commissioned officer, found her there well. After midnight, you know, Martinez, when I first joined the army 30 years ago, they told me women couldn't handle combat. Too emotional, they said. Not physically strong enough. Rachel paused in her cleaning of the rifle. Hayes was a legend. On the base, a soldier who'd served in every major conflict of the past 3 decades. How did you prove them wrong, Sergeant Major? Hayes smiled grimly. By being twice as good as any man they could find. And even then, it wasn't enough until I saved the lives of an entire platoon in Iraq. Sometimes, Martinez, we don't get to prove ourselves gradually. Sometimes we get one moment, one chance to show the world who we really are. What if I fail? Hayes studied her for a long moment. Then you fail doing something no one else on this base could even attempt. But I don't think you're going to fail. You know why? Rachel shook her head. Because you've been preparing for this moment your entire life. Every slight, every dismissal, every time someone told you that you weren't good enough, it all led to this. Don't let fear rob you of your destiny. The next morning, Rachel boarded a military transport that would take her to the insertion point. As the plane lifted off, she caught a glimpse of Fort Braxton shrinking below. She thought about Bishop and Williams, probably still missing somewhere in hostile territory. Despite everything they'd put her through, she found herself hoping they were still alive. The insertion went smoothly. Rachel parachuted into a remote mountain area under cover of darkness, then began the grueling 3-day hike to her shooting position. She carried 60 pounds of equipment, including her rifle, ammunition, communications, gear, and survival supplies. The terrain was brutal, steep mountain paths that tested every muscle in her body, but as she climbed higher into the mountains, she felt a familiar peace settling over her. This was where she belonged. In the wild places where skill and determination mattered more than politics or prejudice. On the second day, she encountered unexpected complications. A winter storm moved through the area, dropping temperatures to well below freezing and creating whiteout conditions. For 8 hours she huddled in her shelter, waiting for the weather to clear. During the storm, her radio crackled with an encrypted message from Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. Intelligence update. Convoy delayed 24 hours due to weather. Window of opportunity now 1200 hours tomorrow. Confirmed position. Rachel keyed her microphone. Position confirmed. ready to engage. But as she settled into her shelter for the night, doubt crept in. 4 kilometers was an impossible distance. The slightest miscalculation would send her bullet harmlessly into the mountainside. And even if she made the shot, would it matter? Would anyone believe that she, the woman they'd all dismissed and underestimated, had accomplished something that bordered on the impossible? She thought about her father's words. The mountain will teach you everything you need to know if you just listen. Outside her shelter, the wind howled through the peaks, but Rachel found herself listening to something deeper, the steady rhythm of her own heart, the quiet confidence that had carried her through every challenge she'd ever faced. Tomorrow, she would have her chance. Tomorrow she would show the world exactly who Rachel Martinez really was. Rachel reached her designated shooting position just as the first light of dawn broke over the eastern peaks. The spot was everything the satellite imagery had promised, a rocky outcropping that provided both concealment and an unobstructed view of the valley below. She spent the next hour setting up her equipment with meticulous care. The McMillan TAC-50 was positioned on a bipod and secured with sandbags she'd carried up the mountain. Every piece of gear was arranged within easy reach, from extra ammunition to her spotting scope to the weather monitoring equipment that would help her calculate the impossible shot. At 3,847 meters, the target zone looked impossibly small. Through her scope, she could barely make out the road that wound through the valley floor, a thin ribbon of asphalt that seemed no wider than a pencil line from this height. Rachel pulled out her ballistic calculator and began running numbers. At this distance, her .50 caliber bullet would take nearly 5 seconds to reach the target. In that time, it would drop over 400 feet due to gravity. The slightest crosswind could push it dozens of yards off course. Her radio crackled, with an encrypted transmission. Overwatch. This is command. Confirm position and readiness. Rachel keyed her microphone. Command. Overwatch in position. Visibility good. Weather stable. Ready to engage. Copy. Overwatch. Latest intelligence confirms target vehicle will be third in Convoy. Black armored sedan. Window of engagement approximately 30 seconds as Convoy negotiates the curve at checkpoint Charlie. Rachel studied the valley through her spotting scope, identifying the curve where the convoy would be most vulnerable. It was a hairpin turn that would force the vehicles to slow down, giving her the best possible chance at a successful engagement. As the morning progressed, she continued her preparations. Every hour she rechecked her equipment and ran new ballistic calculations. The weather was holding steady, light winds from the northwest, temperature holding at 42 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 60%. At 1,000 hours, 2 hours before the convoy was scheduled to arrive, Rachel received an unexpected transmission. Overwatch, this is Ghost Team, do you copy? The voice was weak and filled with static, but Rachel recognized it immediately. It was Bishop. Ghost Team, this is Overwatch. I copy, what's your status? Overwatch. Bishop's voice was strained, exhausted. We're alive. Captured 3 days ago, escaped this morning. We're approximately 2 clicks north of your position, but we're being pursued. Enemy patrol, at least a dozen hostiles. Rachel felt her heart racing. Her fellow soldiers were alive, but they were in immediate danger, and they were close enough that enemy forces might discover her position. Ghost Team, can you reach friendly territory? Negative. Williams is wounded. We're moving slow. They'll catch us within the hour. Through her spotting scope, Rachel could see movement in the northern part of the valley, small figures moving through the forest, the enemy patrol Bishop had mentioned. Command, this is Overwatch, she radioed. Ghost Team is alive and requesting assistance. Enemy patrol in pursuit. Approximately 12 hostiles. There was a long pause before Thompson's voice came back. Overwatch, your mission remains unchanged. The convoy is priority 1. Ghost Team will have to find another way. Rachel stared at the radio in disbelief. Command, these are American soldiers, we can't just abandon them. Overwatch, General Petrov is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of coalition forces. This may be our only chance to eliminate him. Your orders stand. Rachel set down the radio and returned to her spotting scope. Through the lens, she could see the enemy patrol closing in on Bishop's position. In the distance, dust was rising from the valley road. The convoy was approaching ahead of schedule. For the first time in her military career, Staff Sergeant Rachel Martinez was facing an impossible choice. She could complete her mission and potentially save hundreds of lives by eliminating a high-value target, or she could abandon her post to help her fellow soldiers, the same men who had spent years undermining and dismissing her. She thought about what Bishop had said just weeks I go when bullets start flying and people start dying, she cracked. Women always do. Through her scope, she watched as the enemy patrol spread out, surrounding the area where Bishop and the others were hiding. They had maybe 10 minutes before they would be overrun. The convoy was now visible on the valley road, a line of black vehicles moving steadily toward the kill zone. Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, her decision was made. She keyed her radio. Ghost Team, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on the enemy patrol. Stand by for fire support. Overwatch. Negative. Thompson's voice cut through the radio static. You will not compromise your position. That is a direct order. Rachel switched to a different frequency, one she knew Bishop would be monitoring. Ghost Team, in 60 seconds, I'm going to thin out your welcoming committee. When the shooting starts, move south toward the tree line. There's a ravine there that will give you cover. She selected her first target through the scope, an enemy soldier positioned on a rocky ledge about 2,800 meters away. It was still an extremely difficult shot, but within the realm of possibility that the rifle bucked against her shoulder, and 3 seconds later, she watched the target fall. The enemy patrol immediately went into defensive positions, but they couldn't see where the shot had come from. Rachel shifted to her second target, a soldier trying to coordinate the patrol's movements. Another shot, another target eliminated. Command, what the hell are you doing? Thompson's voice was furious over the radio. My job, ma'am, Rachel replied, calmly, lining up her third shot. Protecting American soldiers. By the time she'd eliminated 4 targets, the enemy patrol was in complete disarray. Through her spotting scope, she could see Bishop and his team moving toward the ravine she identified, but her shots had revealed her position. Enemy forces were now converging on the rocky outcropping where she was positioned, and the convoy had stopped in the valley, alerted by the gunfire. Through her scope, she could see General Petrov's armored sedan, sitting motionless on the valley road. The shot was still possible, but she would have only seconds before enemy forces reached her position. Rachel made a final ballistic calculation, accounting for the changed weather conditions and the stress-induced elevation of her heart rate. The mathematics were perfect, the conditions as good as they would ever be. She settled the crosshairs on the distant target and began to control her breathing. In that moment, suspended between one heartbeat and the next, Rachel Martinez understood something profound about herself. She wasn't fighting to prove anything to Bishop or Henderson or anyone else. She was fighting because it was right, because it was what her father had taught her, what her brother had died for. The shot, when it came, was the culmination of everything she'd ever learned about Trachel's finger found the trigger as the crosshairs settled on the distant target. At 3,847 meters, General Petrov's armored sedan looked like a toy through her scope. The mathematics were perfect, but at this distance, perfection might not be enough. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow to its familiar rhythm. In the distance, she could hear the enemy patrol approaching her position, voices shouting in Russian, the sound of boots on rocky terrain. She had minutes, maybe less, before they would be close enough to engage her directly. The shot broke cleanly, the massive .50 caliber bullet beginning its 5-second journey across the valley. Rachel kept the rifle steady, watching through her scope as the bullet traced its invisible arc through the morning air. For seconds, 5 seconds, the bullet impacted the sedan's front engine block with devastating effect. The armored vehicle lurched to a stop, steam pouring from under its hood. Through her scope, Rachel could see figures moving around the disabled vehicle, but at this distance she couldn't confirm whether her primary target had been eliminated. Command, this is Overwatch. Target vehicle disabled. Cannot confirm status of primary target. Thompson's voice crackled back immediately. Outstanding work, Overwatch. Intelligence confirms convoy has stopped. You need to evacuate immediately. But Rachel was already moving. She'd planned her escape route carefully, knowing that revealing her position would bring immediate retaliation. She broke down her rifle in record time, secured her equipment, and began moving down the backside of the mountain. The enemy patrol reached her firing position just as she disappeared into the tree line below. She could hear them shouting, their voices echoing off the mountain walls, but she was already 500 meters away and moving fast. Her radio crackled with Bishop's voice. Overwatch, this is Ghost Team. We're clear and moving to extraction point. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen. Rachel almost smiled at the grudging respect in his voice, but she was too focused on her own survival to appreciate the irony. The enemy would be tracking her now, and she had a 10-mile hike through hostile territory to reach the extraction point. For the next 6 hours, Rachel moved through the mountain wilderness with every skill her father had taught her as a child. She avoided trails, used natural cover, and moved with the patience of someone who understood that haste could mean death. Twice, she heard helicopters overhead and Army aircraft searching for her. Each time, she found concealment and waited motionlessly until the sound faded. Her camouflage gear and training served her well, but she knew her luck couldn't hold forever. As darkness fell, she reached a ridge overlooking the extraction zone. Through her binoculars, she could see the landing seat, a small clearing where a helicopter would pick her up at 0200 hours. But she could also see something that made her blood run cold. Enemy soldiers had reached the extraction point first. At least 20 hostiles were positioned around the clearing, clearly waiting for her arrival. Rachel keyed her radio on a secure frequency. Command, this is Overwatch. Extraction site is compromised. Estimate 24 hostiles in defensive positions. Thompson's voice came back immediately. Copy, Overwatch. We'll find another extraction point. Negative, Command. Ghost team needs immediate evacuation. Williams is seriously wounded and won't survive another night in the mountains. There was a long pause. Overwatch, we can't risk the helicopter crew for a compromised landing zone. Rachel studied the enemy positions through her binoculars. They were well placed, with overlapping fields of fire that would make any helicopter approach extremely dangerous. But she could see weaknesses in their positioning, gaps that could be exploited by someone with the right skills and equipment. Command, give me 30 minutes. I can clear the landing zone. Overwatch, that's suicide. You're outnumbered 20-1. Rachel thought about her brother Miguel, about her father's lessons, about every person who had ever doubted her capabilities. Command, I didn't come this far to leave my fellow soldiers behind. She switched frequencies. Ghost team, this is Overwatch. In 25 minutes, I'm going to light up that landing zone like the 4th of July, when the shooting starts. You move to the extraction point as fast as you can. The helicopter will have maybe 60 seconds on the ground. Bishop's voice came back weak but determined. Overwatch, you can't take on 20 hostiles by yourself. Watch me. Rachel spent the next 20 minutes moving into position. She couldn't engage all 20 enemies directly, but she didn't need to. What she needed was to create enough chaos and confusion to give the extraction helicopter a fighting chance. She positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the enemy forces, about 800 meters from their positions. At this distance, her shots would be accurate and devastating, and the enemy would have difficulty determining her exact location in the darkness. At exactly 0130 hours, she began her assault. Her first shot eliminated the enemy's radio operator, cutting off their communications. Her second and third shots took out the soldiers manning the heavy machine gun that posed the greatest threat to the incoming helicopter. The enemy force immediately went into defensive positions, but they were firing blindly into the darkness. Rachel moved after each shot, using the terrain to her advantage, appearing like a ghost to eliminate targets and then vanishing again. For 15 minutes, she conducted a one-woman campaign of terror against a force 20 times her size. She used every trick she'd learned in 8 years of military service, every lesson her father had taught her about patience and precision. When the extraction helicopter appeared on the horizon, exactly half of the enemy force had been eliminated, or wounded. The remainder were pinned down, afraid to move, not knowing where the next shot would come from. The helicopter landed in the clearing for exactly 60 seconds. Rachel watched through her scope as Bishop and his team, including the wounded Williams, climbed aboard. As the aircraft lifted off, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction, but her own extraction was still 20 minutes away, and the surviving enemy forces were now converging on her position. She had eliminated their comrades, disrupted their mission, and humiliated them in front of their commanders. They would show no mercy when they found her. Rachel began moving again, but she was exhausted from the long day and running low on ammunition. As she crested a small ridge, she found herself face to face with 3 enemy soldiers who had flanked her position. For a moment, everyone froze. Then training took over, and the clearing erupted in gunfire. When the shooting stopped, 2 of the enemy soldiers were down, but Rachel had taken a bullet in her left shoulder. The third soldier was wounded but still dangerous, raising his rifle for a final shot. Rachel's sidearm cleared its holster in one smooth motion. Her shot was perfect, as it had been all day. As she applied pressure to her wound, her radio crackled with the sound of approaching helicopters. Her own extraction team was inbound, guided by the GPS beacon she'd activated. Overwatch, this is Rescue 1. We have you on GPS. Pop smoke and prepare for extraction. Rachel fired her signal flare into the night sky, painting the mountainside in red light. As the helicopter settled into the clearing, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had accomplished something that military historians would debate for years to come. She had made an impossible shot, saved her fellow soldiers, and survived against overwhelming odds. But more importantly, she had proven something to herself. She wasn't just as good as the men who had doubted her, she was better. As the helicopter lifted off into the night sky, carrying her toward safety, Rachel Martinez finally understood what her father had meant about the mountain testing her strength. She had passed the test. 2 weeks later, Rachel sat in a military hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, her left arm in a sling but otherwise recovered from her ordeal. The bullet had missed any major arteries, and military surgeons had removed the fragments with minimal permanent damage. What had changed dramatically was everything else. The story of her impossible shot had spread through military channels like wildfire. A 3,847-meter kill shot nearly 4 kilometers was beyond anything in recorded military history, combined with her single-handed assault on 20 enemy soldiers to enable the extraction of her fellow team members. Rachel Martinez had become something she'd never expected to be, a legend. Colonel Henderson appeared in her doorway, looking uncomfortable and older than she remembered. His team had been extracted safely, and all members were recovering from their ordeal. He pulled up a chair beside her bed. "Sergeant Martinez," he began, then paused, clearly struggling with what to say. "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you a lot more than that." Rachel studied his face. The man who had dismissed her so readily just weeks ago now looked humbled, almost ashamed. "Sir, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," Henderson interrupted. "I let my own prejudices cloud my judgment. I chose soldiers for that mission based on outdated assumptions rather than actual capability. And because of that decision, my team was captured and nearly killed." He pulled out a folder thick with documents. "The Army agrees. There's going to be a full investigation into my decision-making process, but that's not why I'm here." Henderson opened the folder, revealing orders with official seals and signatures. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, you're being promoted to Sergeant First Class, effective immediately. You're also being recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat." Rachel felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor, awarded only for exceptional acts of heroism. Additionally, Henderson continued, "You're being offered command of the newly formed Long-Range Precision Engagement Team. It's a specialized unit that will operate directly under NATO command, focusing on extreme distance target elimination. If you accept, you'll be promoted to Master Sergeant within 6 months." Rachel stared at the papers, hardly believing what she was reading. Everything she'd worked for, dreamed of, was being offered to her on a silver platter. What about Bishop? And the others? How do they feel about this? Henderson actually smiled. "See for yourself." The door opened, and Bishop walked in, followed by Williams and the rest of the team. Williams was on crutches, but all of them were alive and recovering well. Bishop approached her bed, his usual arrogant demeanor completely absent. "Martinez, I owe you my life. We all do." He extended his hand. "I was wrong about you, dead wrong. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to serve under your command." Williams nodded from behind his crutches. "We all would. You're the finest soldier any of us have ever served with." Rachel shook Bishop's hand, feeling years of resentment and hurt beginning to heal. These men had learned something that couldn't be taught in any training manual, that courage, skill, and dedication had nothing to do with gender. Over the next hour, the team briefed her on the aftermath of her mission. Intelligence confirmed that General Petrov had been killed in the attack on his convoy. The loss of their strategic commander had caused the enemy offensive to collapse, potentially saving thousands of coalition lives. The impossible shot had been analyzed by ballistic experts from 3 different countries. The consensus was that it represented the longest confirmed kill in military history, achieved under combat conditions that made it even more remarkable. But for Rachel, the technical achievement was less important than what it represented. She had faced the ultimate test of her skills, courage, and character, and she had emerged victorious. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson arrived that evening with another surprise. "Martinez, there's someone here to see you." A woman in her 70s entered the room wearing a simple black dress and carrying a worn leather purse. Rachel recognized her immediately from photographs.